Bienvenidos todos al panel. Primeramente, me gustaría pedirles que se vengan a las filas de adelante, por favor. Queremos que este sea un panel un poquito más íntimo. Entonces, se pueden acercar para ser un poquito más participativos. Pues bienvenidos al panel de guía de inversiones en etapas tempranas. Me da muchísimo gusto presentarles a Lisa, quien estará moderando el panel y presentará a los demás de los speakers que tenemos el día de hoy.
Hola, buenos días. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for taking time. I know you all have choice, and we're all appreciative that you're here to share in the story of early stage impact investing, how to do it, why it's important. First, I'd like to introduce the gentlemen who are going to help me with this conversation today, but I also want you to look at your neighbor right next door. Who's sitting next to you? Because the person that you see next to you is also going to participate in the conversation. We're going to be talking about experience. So what is the Tonic E-Guide? Tonic E-Guide is a collection of stories from investors, entrepreneurs, and intermediaries around the world who are doing impact investing, and we're eager and willing to share their story. Why? Because stories really are the basis for how we as a species have communicated to each other about our experience, to grow communities, to grow vibrant communities. And that's what the impact investing world is doing. And so this, the Tonic E-Guide that's online, it's downloadable. And it's, by the way, big announcement, and I made it this morning. It is now online in Spanish. And you can download it. It was translated by Mariana Gonzalez, who has worked for Adobe and New Venture Capital, and she's right now an MBA student up at Stanford. So I just wanted to get her name out there because she did a super job. So let me introduce, starting on the far side of the stage, Graham Day, lives in Colombia, married to a Colombian. But he's from Canada A. He works with LGTVP, and when that name has come up a few times, this is an organization that came out of Liechtenstein, and they have their offices in Switzerland. And they have been doing a lot of innovation in the impact space, both on the capacity building side and on the fund creation and investment side. He has been an investment manager since 2012. So what's really cool is he's like this new millennial guy, young guy, and he's going to be looking at this whole thing through his unique lens. We're seeing a lot of folks like Graham in impact investing, and they really depend on the storytelling of the old geezers next to him, the old guys who've been doing it for some time, although Ross isn't that old. So Graham has worked as a program manager for the Clinton Health Initiative in Haiti. He's a management consultant he was a management consultant with Oliver Wyman in multiple regions. And he comes well qualified, as do many people in the impact space. He has a master's degree in economics and international affairs from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., I guess. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Baltimore. Oh, it's in D.C. Okay. So Ross Baird, next one up. How many of you know Ross? Okay, good. I bet you didn't know this about Ross, though. No, Ross was basically dating the daughter of a man that we were working with in India, and none of us knew about it. He's a clever guy.
Worked in person.
Yeah, he does. So he's the founder of Village Cap, which we've worked with Ross since the early days of Village Cap when they were running, I think, kind of the initial prototype of it in India with the DASRA program that we were working with as well. And they recruit early-stage enterprise solving major global problems, and they operate a business acceleration program to improve venture impact and growth, and invest in enterprises through a unique peer selection model. And by the way, I used this model in Hawaii with Ross's help recently. They operate 22 programs with partners worldwide, supporting 350 companies. The one thing that we do know about Ross is he's not lazy. In fact, he is incredibly busy right now, and I'm not even going to go into what he did prior, because what he's doing now is so profound and so impactful. He does come also very well qualified. He has a Master's of Philanthropy, no, is that philosophy? Or Master's of Philosophy from the University of Oxford, and a BA from the University of Virginia. And last but not least is my husband, Charlie. Yeah, he's wondering. So he's we've done a lot together. I have to say that couples that invest together stay together. So if you guys are having marital difficulties, think about it. So we're the co-founders of a bunch of things: Social Impact International, our family foundation, Tonic, the 100% Impact Network. Charlie obviously has been very active in impact investing over the last 10 years. He supports entrepreneurs through capacity building. He's been creating global networks for impact investors, and he's passionate about changing capitalism and modern portfolio theory to support a sustainable planet. And then myself, I think we had an intro of me this morning. I'm also an impact investor. I'm an architect, actually. That was my profession, if you will, but I came from a very entrepreneurial family, grew up working in a family business, helped my father sell that business to a national company, so I had a taste very early on about what it means to convert a family enterprise to to become part of a national concern. And I haven't really looked back. I've been involved in 4 or 5 startups of my own, and the last one was the one that where I traded services for stock. That's another way of playing the game. So with that, we're going to go through the Tonic Guide, and let me go to the next. Let's see if we're as lucky as we were. Yes. Maybe it's his turn. Oh, very good. So, our goal today is not to meditate on impact investing. You might think Charlie here on a rock is the metaphor, but it's not. It's really, our goal today is to become action-oriented. Next slide, please. In fact, today, like this woman with the rope and the carabiners who's getting ready actually to climb a tree, we're going to outfit you with tools that you can use to improve the practice you may already have, or to maybe remove any hurdles perceived hurdles about getting engaged in impact. Next. So why early stage? The early stage is a wonderful way. First of all, you can come in with much smaller amounts of capital if you're a smaller investor, or let's say you're a big investor but you want to toe dip into the space. So it's a terrific way to come in with smaller amounts of capital. It's a great way for you to roll up your sleeves, because small enterprises really need coaching, they need a partner to help them grow their business. So if you have networks that can help, and you can bring not just your capital, but your human capital, your resources, that is a key combo, and it's a unique opportunity. The other thing is that small enterprise, without small and growing enterprise, you need that to basically be the seed. Why is it called seed? Because it's planting the seeds for every company that's on the planet today started somewhere. And so maybe the company that you're going to grow is going to be a multinational concern sometime down the road. And so we get very excited by it, because both of us can participate in nurturing small, early-stage companies. However, small, early-stage companies are high risk, very volatile, they're imperfect, the entrepreneurs aren't perfect, the teams aren't perfect, the business model is usually in a prototyping state, so there's risk. Next. Whoops, keep going. click a whole bunch of times. There we go. So what kind of early stage enterprises, what sort of problems are they solving? And what kind of businesses are we seeing globally? Oh, just keep clicking. One more. There we go. So they're tackling issues around sustainability, climate change, poverty, water and sanitation, healthcare, political activism. And you can see there that there's a list, and I could have put a number of enterprises under each category. The bottom line is these are not sectors in the classic sense. These are impact themes. And that's really, when I spoke this morning about how people, everyone has a different definition of impact, generally people will decide which theme they're passionate about and then approach the space starting with the theme, and then look for robust examples in the space that would be investable to them. So keep going. So there you see some numbers on the size that the space is growing to. Tonic, we have done thus far about 50 deals. We've invested, our members have invested a little over 25 million, although we're tallying up the total from 2013, and we're growing. So we're definitely, I would say, we're seeing an inflection point where in our early days of membership it was like this, but it last year, 2013, it made a curve and it's now going up. We're seeing that same pattern in the venture community with, there are actually impact investments in the venture community as well. And we're seeing it out in the public markets as well. Next. So I thought I would treat you, because from the Spanish version I cut and paste the Spanish 7 steps. I won't be able to pronounce them, but you can at least see them. So we're going to go through the 7-step process, but we're going to do it in a way where we're going to actually have the folks up here talk about their experience in each of those phases of what one needs to consider when one is doing impact investing. Note that these steps are not sequential. It's more like a dance form. 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, a little cha-cha to the side, cha-cha to the other side, a circle, and then you might get to go another step forward. But that's what investing is like, particularly early stage. Next. Okay, so the first one is talking about developing an impact strategy. So, Ross, can you share a little bit with us about how your strategy for the incubator accelerator program has evolved?
Yes, I think that's a terrific introduction, and thank you, Lisa. It's delightful to be here. How many of you are coming from the investor side, deploying capital into companies? How many of you are coming from the entrepreneur side? You have your own company, work for a company. How many of you are in some kind of intermediary, capacity builder, etc.? Okay. And how many of you are more than one of those? I would say that in this world, if you are doing proactive impact investing and you are an investor, you are also an entrepreneur, because this is such a wild west of a market that you need to think very carefully about what your strategy is, just like any entrepreneur has to figure out what the strategy is for their business. And I think originally when we started Village Capital 4 years ago, we had a very powerful idea that still undergirds what we do today, which is entrepreneurs make investment decisions over capital. We collect groups of entrepreneurs, we build a community of practice among the entrepreneurs, we run a time-bound program. At a certain point, the entrepreneurs review each other, and the top rated by their peers receives investment capital. We think that this is an alternative way of doing diligence on companies that actually works better, for reasons I can go into, for early stage companies. I think that there is a case where companies grow to a certain point that peer diligence maybe works less, but for a company in a particular stage of development where investors, traditional investment funds might not invest, and 90% of the 33 investments we've made over the last 4 years, we've been the first money in. If you were ultra risk capital, we think peer diligence works, and that was a strategy that we had at the beginning that we've stuck to all the way through. We've changed just about everything else strategically over the last 4 years beyond what I just told you for reasons I can go into. So I will talk about one aspect of how we've changed our strategy and why and what it's yielded. Originally, when we were recruiting entrepreneurs, we were looking for impact businesses that were within a specific geographic region but cross sectors. So the first pilot we did with Das for Social Impact was impact businesses across India, across sectors, and it was great. We got some really terrific companies, but what we found is a lot of the highest quality entrepreneurs, because I told you how we do our investments. We do it through programs, and to be able to invest in an entrepreneur, they have to sign up for the program. And a lot of the absolute best quality entrepreneurs said, well, I don't need a program to help me. I'm going to be just fine by myself. I know who my investors are or whatever. And so we said the risk if we're doing this wrong is we're getting the best of the second tier companies if the first tier companies don't want to go through this program, which is a core part of our strategy. So we said, okay, what could we do differently to get the absolute most excellent impact businesses to come through our door? So we talked to a lot of the people that we tried to recruit, and they're like, I don't need your help. We said, well, what do you need? And the original idea of our program was focused on making entrepreneurs investment ready, which companies need. There's a lot that goes into that. A lot of the best companies said, well, sure, I need help with investment. I need a lot more help with customer development. If you can, there are these, I'll talk about an example. We have a company called Expirafun in India, and they make really engaging kits that teach kids science, and they sell them to low-cost private schools across India. They cost $20, and you learn boiling point, and it gets kids excited about science and engineering. A terrific company, affordable to these schools that serve the poor. The Expirafun guy says, I don't need investment. I actually need relationships with tens of thousands of schools because I'm spending every day like walking down streets, knocking on doors. If you can get me introduced to schools, that's a different story. I'd love to show up. And so creating what we do now, we create, our strategy is around specific problem theses. So we're looking for businesses that are working within the community of providing quality, affordable education for the poor. And we find that the entrepreneurs that are solving those problems are much more likely to show up.
Thank you, Russ. So, Charlie, I don't know if this is working.
Here. Test. Here.
Okay. So Charlie's going to talk about portfolio approach a little bit, riffing on what we did this morning, but I wanted to show you what some other folks are doing. So this is a carve-out. It's like a piece of pie. Like you have a whole pie, but you say, I'm going to just take a small percentage of it to do impact investing. So some folks are doing that out there. And then this is what we're doing. So there's quite a difference between the two. So Charlie.
Okay, thank you. So when Lisa and I embarked on our journey of aligning 100% of our portfolio to impact, that was the defining criteria, the 100%. We wanted to go all in. That's our intention, to prove pretty much that you can build a portfolio of impact investments and have a huge impact and make money as well. The second piece is the values piece that you bring to the table. So who are you really, and what values do you bring to the table? We are very much both bottom-up and top-down, both supporting communities as well as macroeconomic trends. We are about trust and integrity and giving leeway to the entrepreneurs that we support, yet we're also about enabling them with our support concretely to manage towards business goals and what have you. So that's the approach that we set out to do, and over the last 7 years have actually implemented the first version of this. What that then translates into, the intention into asset classes, right? Because you need to say then, well, how do I express my intention to go all in? Is it really public equities? Do I think that I have a lot of leverage and or impact in investing in public equities vis-a-vis commodities, vis-a-vis cash, vis-a-vis the usual asset classes that a portfolio has? And we came up with a fairly classic asset allocation that we're fine-tuning in order to then maximize the impact after the fact, right? But you go in and say, I want to have this much in cash because of the liquidity constraints of the portfolio or such and such, right? And then we put all of our cash investments, as Lisa pointed out this morning, into impactful banks that provide the transparency and the reporting to us so we know what our money is doing. So without going into more detail on the asset classes, that was the second step, right? And then we started filling it up. And then the carve-out up there is an important concept because we almost did a reverse carve-out to support early enterprises that Ross was talking about. And in the US, they are called sometimes for foundations program-related investments, which count actually as grants, right? And so we partition our grant portfolio into pure grants and investments in very risky startups that we partner up with Ross and others, right? So you see how we box the 3% into the early stage investments, and that translates into about a dozen investments that we have done, and we do now probably 3 investments per year, on an ongoing basis as part of this strategy. So before I stop on our strategy, I wanted to mention a couple of more things. One is the layered approach. And, a lot of these enterprises that are fledgling in markets where either there is no equity capital available or the entrepreneurs would never create enough value to attract equity capital, right? Because that's what equity capital looks for. And they don't have the collateral or the cash flow to attract commercial debt. In these instances, a grant is a very valid strategy to get a social entrepreneur off the ground. We, however, then make it an objective in the investments that we do that over time they become more self-sufficient on the financial side and are providing maybe even loan guarantees that if they don't default, that would then lead the banks to give them money because we de-risk the follow-on financial providers do these. So it's a very intentional strategy to help early-stage social entrepreneurs get off the ground. And with this, maybe I leave it as a few ideas about how we deal with our portfolio.
Okay, great. So just to wrap it up, there are a lot of different ways people approach strategies for how they're going to approach the impact space. We just went 100%. Some people do a carve-out. I can say that any particular strategy is going to have a certain set of risks associated with it. A carve-out, for instance, if depending on the size of the carve-out, you may not be able to mitigate risk as well in a smaller carve-out because your investment size will be a lot smaller. And just trying to kind of stretch that out is going to be difficult. Although we have seen people successfully deploy $1 million in a a nice round, a multi-asset class portfolio. So it is possible. So, anyone recognize this guy? Who's this guy? It's the Lone Ranger. I put him up here because there are a lot of folks in the impact investing industry, and I would say in any investment, who act like Lone Rangers because they want to keep everything private and quiet. They've got money, they want to deploy it, they don't want to talk to their peers about it for whatever reason. But the reality is, in impact investing in particular, actually not being a Lone Ranger has a huge value, not only to you as the investor, it can help de-risk your investment, helps you figure out who the follow-on capital is going to be. Syndicating can bring a lot of different skills and values to the table, so being able to partner with other people, being able to share in the due diligence costs, this is all something to think about as you're setting your strategy. Am I going to go this alone and be the Lone Ranger, or am I going to actually get a group together? And there's a number of people at this conference who've met each other at these conferences, and they're now starting to invest with each other. And I think it's had a very positive impact on the space. So what does an oil pipeline have to do with anything? So this is the oil pipeline that goes over the border. It goes from Alaska to America. It's not the best example, but it actually is an interesting metaphor. Notice it's not straight, right? The reason it's not straight is it crosses a fault line, and so the design of that pipeline is made so that when the fault moves, that the pipe moves in a way that it doesn't break. What's the metaphor here? Pipelines in investing. You want to find a pipeline or a way to access a pipeline through a vetted, resilient source where you're going to get your deal flow from. So that so kinks in the marketplace really aren't going to impact your ability to do your impact investing, get to your resources, and act on supporting the investments you have in your portfolio and growing your portfolio. So typically, access to a pipeline may look like this. It may be somewhat of a circuitous route, but it serves a purpose. So this is a long list. You can glance at it while we're having the conversation, but I'm going to ask Graham if he can share with us, how does LGTVP source their pipeline?
Thanks very much, Lisa. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks to the organizers of the conference and for the invitation on this panel. LGTVP is, as said in the introduction, a global impact investor. We have 29 portfolio organizations across Latin America, Africa, Europe, India, and Southeast Asia. So those are a lot of ecosystems to be in and try to have a sort of comprehensive strategy on how to source. So I think of this as sourcing as a bit of the push, having deals pushed to you, and whether you can go and kind of pull deals out. And I think the second part of that is much harder and much newer. As deals are pushed to us, we of course work with intermediaries. We work with our colleagues, the investors in our different regions, and try to just learn from each other what everybody is looking for, what everybody's motivations are, so we can appropriately reference deals or have deals referenced to us. And as almost a side note, we've just done an exercise in Colombia, which my friend and colleague Alejandro from this morning mentioned, to map out the sector, to really understand what our other potential co-investors are looking for. And that's a step in the right direction of being able to sort of cross-reference deals. As examples, we've actually had a deal reference and executed through a social investment bank in Colombia. We've worked with even the Unisocial business group to source really early stage deals. The second part, though, sort of being able to pull out deals from the community of entrepreneurs, I think is a little bit trickier. And this comes, and I'm going to be curious if anybody here agrees, that lots of entrepreneurs don't self-select into the impact space. They're doing some fantastic work with their business models, and they aren't thinking about looking for capital from impact investors because it's just so natural to them what they're doing, and their business model is the way it is, and perhaps they don't recognize that impact puts them in almost a special category. So I think from LGTVP, we'd like to do more of going to certain specific trade shows, or going to certain conferences, or talking to specific players in specific sectors to sort of help that process and sort of almost advertise the industry a bit, so that those entrepreneurs can recognize their social impact and that we might be an appropriate partner for them.
So access to pipeline can be really complicated in country, and a quality pipeline really depends on infrastructure in country. It depends on, and that infrastructure and that ecosystem has to have investors who are willing, intermediaries who can provide valuable services, and it has to have a thriving incubator, accelerator climate. And so a lot of the geographies that we go in, we were just recently in Burma, they're just really, it's so early days. I think in the whole country they can count 10 enterprises, and of that, 5 of them were grant-based, and the other 5, there was only one that was profitable. Very, very early days, and they have to grow that system. So we struggle at Tonic to find pipeline globally. That's our job. And so I'm just putting out there that it is difficult in developing economies to find robust, investable product. And that's one of the reasons that we get on the road, and one of the reasons that we wrote the Tonic e-guide. But here's an observation that we ran into while we did the work on the e-guide. We thought we understood the universe, but once the paper went out and got online, the amount of emails that I'm getting from Latin America, from communities where there are investors that are doing impact investing, and there are entrepreneurs on the ground doing it, but nobody's talking to anyone. So people are looking to connect the dots. And so something that I think is so important about this conference is this is a huge dot connecting moment, but we need more of it, and we need it in more countries in Latin America to really make this sort of take off down here. I've heard, for instance, in Brazil, we've been wanting to get into the Brazil space for a lot of years. We hear there's a lot of investment activity. We know that actually from a governance perspective and from regulatory that it's very difficult for a foreigner to come in and invest in country. So the other big impediment in Latin America, to be honest, are the regulatory hurdles that are out there. And so pipeline it can often sometimes be available, but then we as international or global investors can't access it. So something else to think about. Charlie's going to talk. Let's see, where am I? Graham? Charlie's next on pipeline.
I just want to add and maybe re-emphasize a couple of thoughts, and that's quality deal flow is different than deal flow, and trust is what matters. And so there's a lot of deal flow out there, I think Lisa alluded to that, but not with the right level of quality, right? And particularly for social entrepreneurs who have no prior business experience, want to do good, but really don't have the tool sets, even incubators, accelerators, take longer than a year to educate them to get to the level where they're investable, right? And so most serious impact investors are looking for trusted partners who provide that vetted quality deal flow. And Tonic is aspiring to do that by really signing up to the principle of radical transparency, of sharing due diligence, right? Because we co-invest all over the world, and it's not very cost effective, which was pointed out before by Audrey, I think, that we all jet around the world to do a $50,000 investment. And so by turning the angel word upside down and really saying our core promise is actually that we share, we don't hide information but share, and we collaborate and trust each other and then learn with each other to do these deals, that's, I think, how we can actually move the needle to the next level.
So just a question for the audience. How many of you folks right now are accessing deal flow through accelerators in country? What's the deal flow look like? Just...
We run my name is Oscar, and I run a program. It's called Smart Impact from the Jardín de Innovación Accelerator. And in Mexico is, I think, we focus very much in technology and innovation. And last year we ran a program. We selected 24 startups. And we had a pipeline for applications for around 300 applicants.
300?
Yeah.
That's cool.
But when we ran that, we partnered up with the Founder Institute. So it was kind of technology, so it made more, it amplified the brand of the Founder Institute.
How many of those deals were investable from your perspective?
Actually, 6 of them got invested.
6
after our program.
That's great. You had 30 in the program and 6 got invested?
Yeah, 24 and 6 got
24 and 6. That's actually that's a good stat.
Yeah.
I wonder, is that pretty much, do you see similar numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about the shift from generalist to specific. I think so many investments don't even have a chance from day one because the entrepreneur isn't smart, or the program, whoever isn't smart about fitting the investor mandate. So I'd say when we did generalist programs, we had about 25%. That about tracks with that. When we've done more kind of problem focus, we're now about 60 to 70% getting invested because education, people show up to the education thing.
Yeah. I'd have to say I had the same experience in Hawaii where we're focusing on an indigenous group who have similar shared issues and basically providing products and services for a very specific audience. And we had 90% of the folks in the cohort were invested in. So there are ways to rev up those numbers in country. Let's see. So these are pulled right out of the tonic guide. If you look in, I wanted to just put this up here, if you look in the regional section for Latin America, the first thing all of you are going to notice is a lot of stuff missing. I need your help. If you can go in, look at that guide, and give me pointers to other organizations, intermediaries, accelerators, anybody in this space that's working on impact investing, we want to upgrade, make this a document that actually has up-to-date information. So I just show this to you so you can see some of what's in there right now. So, does anyone recognize what's happening in this picture? It's a lie detector test. There are people out in the industry, investors, who think that due diligence is like a lie detector test. You take the poor entrepreneur, you strap him to a wire, and every time he tells a lie, he gets a shock. That's not what it is all about. What it's, he's laughing over there. It's actually about a partnership. It's about collectively wanting to move the ball forward in the impact space. It's about dignity. It's about an entrepreneur who's willing to take a huge risk. It's about an investor who's willing also to take a huge risk. And you're coming together to figure out, does it make sense for you both to take this risk? And so in that spirit, we're going to talk a little bit about how the folks up here do due diligence. So Ross, you've had lots of experience in this.
Yep. So how many of you, I need a volunteer. Someone raise their hand? Volunteer to do what? Oscar. Can you define need for me? Need. Need? Yes. Like a need of need. And problem or... Yeah, need is a problem. Someone needs something. Can you define now demand for me?
Demand?
Yes.
Like in the market, in economics, or?
What's the difference? So can you give me the difference between demand versus need?
Demand versus need. Okay.
There's no right answer, so just take your best guess.
Okay. I'm thinking. Demand versus need. Something is that. Well, I don't know. I'm just thinking. Go.
That's okay. That's okay. You want to give it a go? Nicholas, go for it.
A demand is when you know what you want. A need is probably you don't know you need it, but it would be good if you had it.
This is a good need. You don't know you need it, but it would be good if you had it versus you know that you want it. And demand usually is you want or need something so much that you're willing to pay for it. I would say the biggest mistake that we've made in due diligence and the biggest mistake anybody starting a company does is confusing need and demand. Do I have time to tell a story or should I?
Can we circle back?
We can circle back.
Okay.
There's a story about that,
but actually go for it.
Okay, so this is our most spectacular flame out of an investment we've ever had, and the entrepreneur has given me total license to tell this story to any audience, which if your company fails, you should give people license to tell why it failed. It's a great thing. The Hoop Fund, has anyone ever heard of a company called the Hoop Fund? They raised $1.5 million and spent it all, and they were a tremendous idea. It was like you're going to buy fair trade products, and you're going to be able to do a Kiva-like microloan to the producer of the products. So I buy coffee from Lisa's farm, and I make a loan to Lisa. Tremendous idea. What they found out was how many of you buy fair trade products? Huge demand for fair trade products. How many of you have made a microloan or invested in microfinance? Okay, there's a lot of people who've done that. There was no demand from the purchasers of fair trade products to also make a loan to the person who made that exact product. They said, it is great, these producers of coffee need access to capital, we're going to create a company where these consumers get them that. They didn't really do the work of figuring out whether buyers of fair trade products were demanding that extra step of getting involved. So they raised $1.5 million, built a huge team, spent a ton on marketing. They found out that Lisa was actually not going to pay a little bit extra for her fair trade coffee to make a loan. Lisa was quite happy to just buy fair trade coffee.
So they should have done prototyping, and they had a false positive.
Yeah, they had a couple of anecdotes of this is really cool, and that didn't create a business. And we've seen so many businesses that have built huge theories based off of need without actual evidence of demand. So the one thing that we do in due diligence that is a deal breaker is what evidence, even if it's very small, do you have that people are actually demanding your thing and willing to pay for it?
Yes. And so, Ross, I only have your name on due diligence, but I know I had some other person. Does anyone else want to share a story on due diligence? Charlie? Nope. Okay. Okay, we need to move on. All right.
That story wasn't too long.
No, that was good. So here's a process that's in the e-guide. And some people have different ways of doing due diligence. Some people will do what we call just an internet search, very light, first blush, what information can be found publicly about the company. So what does that say to any entrepreneur in the audience? Make sure your website is up to date. Then assuming that they meet that screen, then they're going to go a little bit deeper. And the second one is they want to take a look at the team, the technology, distribution, and revenue model. So now they're dipping a little bit under the first service, starting to peel the onion. And then the phase 2 would be really looking at the markets, the risk, much deeper dive, now getting into the lingo of the investor. And the last one is the legal, financial, and cap table term sheet to basically start to put feelers out for that process to bring it to a conclusion. Audrey talked about an important problem in the space. How many of you have experienced due diligence that seemed to take forever for a very small investment? Yeah. It's a problem, and you know why it's a problem? Because in the financial markets, they only look at the finances, and if you either make it or you don't, over and out. In the impact markets, they're looking at your financials and they're looking at your impact, and impact gets complicated. So I was so pleased to see Audrey trying to tackle this issue. We are painfully aware of it in Tonic. We are also working on how do we shorten this process, the due diligence process, to at least get to a yes or no, and not hang the poor entrepreneur out to dry for a very long time. Very painful process. So we have a lot to learn there.
Lisa, can I just...
Yes.
Is this on? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Tonic Guide brings that out about how it needs to... He's got a green light. All right. How there we are. The process needs to be short because in addition to doing diligence on the financial side, the impact side, those are both changing extremely quickly for these early stage companies. So if you spend 3 months, 4 months looking at it, sometimes you have to revisit your assumptions that you made in month 1. So compressing that is really critical. And at LGTVP, we've been learning that, I think, the hard way. We started an accelerator program, and we still have it in Southeast Asia. We'd started in Latin America as well, and have now kind of closed it. And we were applying our core fund due diligence process basically to early stage entrepreneurs, and we were just going too deep for over too long, and it was really difficult. The other piece in the guide that I found interesting talks about when you're going through the due diligence process, you can often be a coach too. And that line, I think, is very interesting and probably merits another discussion about how much is how do you as an investor help the due diligence process along maybe help even develop the model, but not take ownership. I had an example where I was doing due diligence on an early stage company, and we would chat about the model with the entrepreneur and get really excited about it. And after a couple of months, I realized, looking back at what was kind of developing on the paper and in the model, it was more my ideas than his, and that's not appropriate. So there's a decision to be made of how you do that.
Yeah, so just to sum it up, it's not a lie detector test, it's really a partnership, and it has to be a really careful one where sometimes we come fully loaded with great ideas in the business, but maybe the entrepreneur still isn't the right person to carry that forward, no matter how much due diligence you do on it. So now let's assume that we made it through the due diligence process, and now we're getting ready to sign up the paperwork and do the deal. And so I'm going to have Charlie talk about 2 deals, and then I'm going to ask John Kohler, who's sitting in the audience, to talk about one here in the region that I think are particularly interesting in how the deals came together.
Great. So getting the term sheet is where the rubber meets the road, right? Because the term sheet really encodes the contractual agreement that you have on the investment with the entrepreneur. And it would be great to have a little debate with Ross here on my side about who should be in the driver's seat, right? Because conceptually what happened up until now, until Ross came to the scene, it was only the investors. And, Ross is experimenting with giving a lot more power to the social entrepreneurs to come up with terms, right? I fundamentally believe that it's an and proposition, and that you cannot have one drive and the other one be in the not driver's seat, but it has to be a partnership of equals that negotiates terms that are actually in codifying the impact intention that you want to have together. And I want to share 2 deals where I was actually the lead investor, meaning maybe not the amount of capital that we put together, but the coordination of getting to terms and actually getting the money in the bank for the entrepreneurs. And they're 2 very different ones. One is a very syndicated one across different money streams, and the other one is a very straightforward one that we did with just one co-investor. So the first one is actually an investment in a company called Stitch Brothers out of Vienna, and they're in the business of providing handmade jeans to the affluent market all over Europe, initially in Austria and the German-speaking region of Europe. And they're going about their business as a fully sustainable business, from a supply chain and value chain integration all the way to the manufacturing and the chemicals that they don't use and all of that, including so I was interested in doing that because I think it's a great example of small business in Europe, that small businesses are the backbone of industry, as you might know. And if around fully sustainable supply and value chains, I think that would make a meaningful contribution to the sustainability of a whole region. So the challenge was to get to 1.7 million euros, and Tonic usually aggregates maybe between 500, 600, 700,000, and so I set out to actually contribute through my leadership, maybe 5 or 6 angels to put equity into this, an equity deal of about 500,000-600,000 euros, which we did, and we complemented that. We wanted to have one of the premier social venture funds in the deal. Us angel investors get a lot of confidence out of a deal if institutional capital co-invests with us, because they have their own lens of doing things. They usually have a more rigorous due diligence process around legal constraints, etc. And so I actually encouraged the entrepreneur to reach out to both social venture funds in Europe, in Germany, that would do that. And one of them came back, but they came back with a term sheet proposal that was actually not too good for the entrepreneur. And here you see that I'm actually on the entrepreneur's side to negotiate terms that are fair. In this particular instance, the valuation, which is what you have to agree upon, what's the value of the company that you invest in, the social venture fund actually did use a different valuation, and I disagreed with them by about 1/3. And here comes another trick of if you raise money, or if you are actually aggregating capital, we talk to each other. So I took took up the phone and talked to the investment manager of that fund and said, here's my parameters of how I put in the angel money and the framework and why we use this. If you come in at that level, then we have a deal amongst us, otherwise we don't, right? And so they went off and came back with a term sheet that didn't fit that structure. So the entrepreneur said, no, I will not accept your money. A very courageous step, because it was another 400,000 euros, right, on the way to 1.7 million euros. But I was confident that we could manage without them. So then I leveraged subsidized capital in Austria. There's the Austrian government that supports local entrepreneurs, and got a loan guarantee if I could actually raise debt with a bank that would complement the equity that I did to pull together. And so long story short, with that deal is just being wrapped up, where we have 4 different types of impact investors who collaborate. Everybody has a slightly different return, not impact expectation, but return expectation. So it's layered capital with the guarantee in that. So you see how us impact investors a lot of times need to take responsibility of actually helping the entrepreneur put together a loan, a round that makes sense from a blended capital structure. Briefly, a very different deal that then leads into what John can I think, shine some light on. We recently did a deal in India, in BBK Waste Management, that we structured according to principles that John defined as demand dividend structure. And what a demand dividend structure is actually an investment that taps into the free cash flow of a social enterprise. And you can structure it fairly flexibly with respect to when you draw the returns back out of the company, depending on when the company actually has the cash to pay you back. And we couldn't do it as a pure, demand dividend because of regulatory frameworks that Lisa was pointing out. In India, outside Indian investors, we have to structure any equity investment actually as a forced convertible. And so we had to put this forced convertible sleeve around the demand dividend structure. But the core idea is still that we get paid, and we designed it, John, in such a way, for instance, that the minimum return that we would get based on the free cash flow would be 8% and the maximum 15%. So again, an example of an impact investor where we actually we write into the term sheet that we are not going to make a 27% return, right? And there's reasons for that in this instance from an impact standpoint. So with this, maybe John, you could shine the light on a couple of other principles and an example that you know of here in South America.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Is that all right? All right. So hello everyone, I'm John Kohler. You'll hear me tomorrow morning, but I wanted to just follow up. There is a enterprise that I ran across a year ago in Nicaragua at a boot camp for entrepreneurs. And this enterprise is Maya Mountain Cacao. It is run by a lady by the name of Emily Stone. She's from Boston, but she lives in Belize. And she was confident that she had a good business model. Her business model was to go out and organize Mayan farmer communities in the mountains between Belize and Guatemala. She needed some expansion capital. She had already proven some of the demand, as Ross put it, for her output that these communities would come up with, which is cacao beans, and then she would connect those high-quality cacao products to chocolatiers in the United States. So she knew that she had unmet demand, but she also knew that she had a variable cash flow. She wasn't really sure month to month whether or not she could pay a periodic principal and interest on a debt, and she didn't want to issue equity to raise capital because she didn't want to have to sell her company in order to pay off her equity investors. So she utilized something that we invented called the demand dividend. It is a variable payment option. It's subordinated to other senior debt that a company might have. It is based, as Charlie mentioned, on free free cash flow defined in the term sheet and stapled to the back of the financing. And this was a financing of about $200,000 US to help expand. It has a honeymoon period, in this case longer than I would like, but it's 2 years because all of the money is going into the ground to create new rootstock, new orchards of cacao, and then the first field side processing facilities, and then she brings that to market. And once she brings it to market, the margins are quite high, and she's going to be able to pay back with about a 12 to 15% IRR over about a 6 to 7 year period. There are equity-like terms in this term sheet or in this financing, meaning that the minority investors, who in this case they don't have any equity at all, they just have a debt, still have some say over certain decisions that the company makes, and certainly over anything that might change the economics of the deal. And this was syndicated through Helios Foundation. The capacity development organization in Central America was Agora Partners, and it's successful. She's happy, we're happy. We showcased it at SOCAP as, can both the entrepreneur and the investor be happy? And in this case, it's a good ending. Okay.
It's a great example of how we're innovating in the impact investing space, very different from the pure for-profit markets. So I'm going to move on to managing investments. Graham, you are up for talking about this topic. Oh, sorry. This is sorry. Basically, in a nutshell, clarify your investment, confirm your return, get the terms right, and close that deal. And in the process, by the way, if you don't close the deal, if you at the end of the day walk away, at least leave behind an entrepreneur who is wiser about the gaps in his business model, and hopefully is better for the interaction. So that's what we call win-win. So this is all about managing the investments, and Graham, I have you headlighting that.
Sure. I mean, I think there's so much to talk about in this way.
By the way, we're going to go right to 2:15, and so we've got 2 more topics, managing investments and improving impact, and then a wrap-up. So we will finish at 2:15. You won't miss a thing outside. Nobody's going to eat your lunch for you or whatever's next. So we should be good.
When I said there was so much to talk about, I didn't mean that I was actually going to talk about everything. At LGTVP, we take a very hands-on approach to our investments. Most of them are early stage, even if they are larger ticket sizes. So we feel that there's a lot of need to be a part of the entrepreneur team. So we'll typically, on the governance side, have a board seat, but that doesn't mean we're just interacting with the entrepreneur on a quarterly basis. We internally budget our time about half a day to a day per week on individual organizations. So that means our investment managers really can't take on more than 5 or so opportunities or deals. So that's pretty intense.
Yeah, so one of the points that is really true in the impact space is, particularly with early stage, is that the time to manage investments is really intense. And so if you ever meet anyone who says or claims they have a portfolio of 100 plus investments and they don't have a big staff to do that, there's something terribly wrong, because it's difficult. You 5 per manager.
Investment manager. Yeah. And we then try to further increase our, as we call it, intellectual capital to the entrepreneurs through a fellowship program, which some of you might know or have experienced. It's the ICATS program, Investment Catalyst program, and that's where we recruit young professionals from really all over the globe who are interested in dedicating 10 months of their time to social enterprises, and so they will go and fill a very specific role. So this is demand from our entrepreneurs, where they feel that they have a relative weakness in their organizations. Could be in finance, fundraising, marketing, whatever it might be, and then we sort of search the globe through a sort of a competitive process, and then place a fellow in each of our companies. Acumen does a similar thing.
So a really important point here, when you're an entrepreneur and you're an investor, the fact that the two of you are aligned is really critical. How many entrepreneurs or how many investors have ever invested in or been invested by someone who actually had a whole different idea about the impact that the business should have? Anyone in this room? It's a painful lesson to learn if you get involved and your management style it rubs the person the wrong way. We see this often enough in the industry, and it sometimes can tank the relationship and tank the business. So what's really cool about what LGT is doing is that not only are they committing to the enterprise capital, but also these incredible resources that folks need boots on the ground of someone to roll their sleeves up and help maybe construct the financial rigor inside a company. And that is something that, so if I was an entrepreneur, I'd be running after you to hope that you would invest in my enterprise, because I would get those extra services, which are really great.
And this goes back to the sourcing stage of if an enterprise only wants our financial capital, it's probably not a good fit, because then we're going to be bumping up against each other of talking about whether we should have any say in sort of decisions and how we can help. So we make it clear right from the beginning that we really want to be a part of their story, of their growth, and for which we can supply those extra resources.
Okay, I'm going to move forward. So managing for mutual success, establishing a regular financial impact reporting process, and working directly with the enterprise. Two key pieces that I think Graham has really touched on in his sharing. Oops. So the next topic is about impact measurement. And I'm going to share a real quick story about a woman that I know who invested about $2 million in improving health outcomes for children in India, in the Punjab area. Big investment. She brought in experts. She worked with universities. She did a lot of studies. They set what the rates of diarrhea were in the area, and their goal was to reduce it from the current percentage to something lower. And they made all these investments. 2 years later, they did a measurement. It hadn't moved 1 inch. It was the same that it was when they came in. And then someone on the team had this great idea to look a little further, and they started to compare in other regions. It turned out that in Punjab, the rate was the lowest in all of India. So the lesson there is impact measurement in isolation. People are shaking their heads. $2 million in the wrong region. So with that story, let's see, Ross, Europe.
Yo aprendí español cuando tuve 20 años y por eso la calidad de mi español es muy mal. I said I learned Spanish when I was 20 years old, and because of that, the quality of my Spanish is pretty bad, and I'm sure I mangled it somehow. Did you guys understand what I said? Más o menos. But kids who learn Spanish, or kids who learn multiple languages when they're little, become fluent very, very quickly. And I, would like to improve my Spanish and work on it from time to time, but it doesn't come naturally to me as it would if I learned it when I was 3 years old. And I think that the same analogy carries to businesses being fluent in the language of both business operations and impact. I think when you are setting up impact metrics, impact tracking, impact reporting for businesses, it has to be a frontline thing from the second you invest, saying what are you trying to accomplish, how will we know you're accomplishing it from an impact and results perspective, and how will you measure it. It is very easy for businesses that are great to be fluent in profit and loss because they don't exist if they're not. We've only really seen successful understanding of the impact the businesses are having if it's something that you're very firm about early and often from the early days.
Thank you, Ross. Graham?
On impact measurement?
Yeah.
we use the IRIS indicators, IRIS Plus, I think we'd call it, because we create our own as well. But I think the point we harp on a lot with our entrepreneurs is fine, those are outcomes, or those are outputs, what are the actual outcomes? And so we spend a lot of time trying to think through the theory of change and drive at what are the outcomes that we can expect, and what is the evidence of impact. And I think some of the most sort of exciting entrepreneurs that we work with are really passionate about that too, and about studying that change. And so we're trying to move our own internal discussion from impact measurement to impact management. How do we sort of push that story ahead? And as you said, it's much easier to do when you have clear buy-in right from the get-go.
Yep.
with the entrepreneurs.
Yep. So what's the reality about impact measurement? It's really important, but guess what? Hardly anybody does it. When we went around and talked to investors around the world, and we talked to entrepreneurs, what did the entrepreneurs say? The entrepreneurs said, well, they hardly ever ask me. I collect all this data, and then nobody asks me, nobody cares. That's number one. Number two, you ask the investors, and they say, well, you know, I know they're impactful. That's why I'm investing in them. And, you know, it's just too much work to kind of go out there and quantify it. And you know what? It's a seed stage. It's just going to increase my costs. I'm not going to get into it. So what we discovered, though, is that's kind of, I would say, the predominant voice, but there is a movement in the space. And I've detected it in the last 2 years. If I'm doing capacity building in Hawaii with a group, and when I asked that group in Hawaii, and Hawaii is a set of islands that are the furthest away from any landmass in the world, so they're really isolated. And when I asked them about impact measurement, every single one of them said, oh, of course we measure impact, and we always talk to our investors, and we do, we work it out together. I thought, how in the heck do these people in Hawaii know how to do this when the rest of the world can't figure it out? Well, I almost think it's because they had no noise in the system, and they just innately realized this was key. And they had very few investors, and so the conversation was pretty straightforward and simple, and that's the only guess I can make on it. So this little range here says no metrics. We have some folks who do their investments, and as I said, they just say, I know it's impactful. I just know. And then we have the limited metrics. People who will maybe pick one or two, maybe an IRIS metric or two, maybe just an agreement on what they are, that they pick something of their own flavor and definition. Then we have the custom, then standard, which is investors who customize their metrics first and then see whether or not some of these metrics fit in with their practice, kind of the experimental crew. And then we see investors who use standards like IRIS, but like Graham, IRIS Plus. We're an IRIS Plus folk as well. I showed that this morning in our presentation. So that's the last piece that we have for our discussion today. What I would really like to do is ask the audience, first of all, if there are any questions, any topics that came up that you want to challenge us or tell us your experience. I would love to hear some stories from some of the entrepreneurs who raised their hands. How about a nice horror story or even a really great story on your experience? Anyone willing, able to share?
So really quickly, before we break into questions, the lunch was scheduled at 2, and we'll be in the 3rd floor by the pool area. So I'll invite any of you that have a meeting or would like to go in that direction now. Otherwise, we can stay for another 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, just 4 more minutes. We're going to take
two or three questions. Okay. So I'll pass around.
Thank you. My name is Mark Senti, president of AML Superconductivity and Magnetics. Sounds very high tech. Learn more about it tomorrow. But as a technology company, we're approached by investors all the time asking us, does this thing really work? And there's a lot of junk out there, and it's very frustrating, especially in the social impact area where they see these really good ideas that entrepreneurs have, and does it really work? And my experience has been that they do a terrible job of technical due diligence. Can you comment on that? That's sophisticated investors as well. And maybe because the science is too hard, I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that to your point of shifting our investment thesis from a geographic focus to a problem focus. I'll give you an example, and it's not just technology, but in the education program I described, you can run chains of private schools for the poor that do a terrible job of actually educating kids. So we did curriculum and pedagogy diligence on people that were delivering educational content. And when we, when we do help, we have technology experts who do diligence. I think partnerships with people who know deep content around what you're investing in are critical. And we used to not do that and had some mistakes as a result.
Well, it's how the venture community works, right? I mean, they have deep knowledge in what they invest in.
But the VC community also has deeper pockets, and the impact investment community is really working its way up the ladder. And so one of the big holes that I see in impact investing is around analysis. We really don't have the analytics that the rest of the, the investing communities have. And so we're working, I think Rockefeller has done a huge job in helping us create these unique metrics to this industry, but we have a long way to go to have enough data that we can start to share and compare. So that's kind of the state of where it is, but also leveraging our partners in the for-profit space. I do that all the time. We sit, we sit in both worlds, and so if I have a deal that has a technology that I'm not familiar with, I will get on the phone and talk to some of my VC friends who have deeper knowledge in that area.
When you are investing, I think it's critical for some of these people, most of the people in the social aspect, is that they have, for them it's more important or as important to have some coaching, to have some people with experience, with talents and relations, other than having the money there. Also to go and do the follow-up with them. They are mostly people with good intentions, but they have to need someone to help them through as any other business. So you can comment on the coaching aspect and the getting resources, but human resources, as you mentioned at the start.
No, I think accelerator resource, the accelerator community and resources can make a huge difference. I'm going to give you an example from Hawaii. I had someone in the enterprise who has an organic farm. They had an opportunity to quadruple the size of their farm, but the idea of raising $13 million in capital was completely out of his reach. He didn't even know where to go in Hawaii. Who's going to give him this money? How's that going to work? Long story short is he went through the program. He was better able to articulate the ask. He could break it up. He could defend it. Today he's working with Total Impact Advisors out of San Francisco. They're creating this vertical stack. I talked about that with the blended layered capital this morning. They're creating a layered stack that includes grants and low interest debt and some vehicles from some government agencies. So it's a public-private partnership. They're organizing it, and we're going to take that out to the market. And believe it or not, within 13 months, we've identified most of the folks who can fill the buckets. And so he went from thinking there's no way I can raise, well, he said 10 million. And when I looked at it, I said, no, you need 13 million when I analyzed the business model. And now we're just putting it all together, and we're probably 3 to 6 months away from collecting or signing up everyone for the rest of the deal. This is needed. We have to play a critical role. Entrepreneurs can't do it all. They don't have sometimes the bigger picture unless they're coming from prior experience into the industry with all their networks. We're the ones with the networks, and we have to play that critical role for them. So with that, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon, and thank you so much for being interested in impact.
I'm sorry, one last announcement. There was a change in the agenda, and so the creativity room, which is on the first floor, Regency 1, has a creativity activity that was on the agenda. It says it's scheduled for tomorrow, but the activity will be today at 4:30. So hopefully you can join them for that. And thank you very much. Thank you.